There are only 5 cities in all of Westeros, that being King's Landing, Oldtown, Lannisport, Gulltown, and White Harbor. In this video, I'm going to grade every single one of them through 6 key metrics to determine which city is the best. And this is going to look at livability metrics to see where would you want to live, which city has the most influence over all of Westeros, and just overall, which one is the most impactful for just Westerosi politics in general. The 6 metrics we're going to be looking at today are visuals. What does the surrounding area look like? Climate. What does it feel like to live there? Economy. What is the economic opportunity like in here? What are the trade opportunities like? What is just the overall economic climate? Cleanliness. Is the city plumbed? Is it cobbled? Is it paved? Is there manure in the streets? How well is the city maintained? Security. How defensible is the city? Is it prone to being raided? Where is it located that makes it more strategically defensible or more prone to attack? And last of all, political climate. How politically important is this city? How does it relate to just the general Westerosi politics? So those are the 6 metrics I'm going to be looking at when rating these cities. I'm going to compile them into a score based on 1 through 10. I'm going to average them out, and then we are going to rank all the cities based on their livability metric. So the first city that I have is Gulltown. Now, for visuals, it is on the coast and it has mountains nearby to the west. So, given its location on the Bay of Crabs, given that it's near the ocean, it's on mountainous area, it seems to be in a good location. I gave it an 8.5 out of 10 for visuals. For climate, it seems to have a more moderate summer with slightly harsher winters. We know that in the Vale, it gets so cold that in the mountains of the moon, the Eyrie cannot be inhabited during wintertime. But we do know that down on the floor in the valley, it is not as cold, and farming is still done routinely. So it leads us to think that Gulltown has more moderate summers in the south, but harsher winters, although not as harsh as the north. So all of this leads me to conclude that I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 for climate. Gulltown's economy is also quite interesting because it is a crucial import and export for the Vale when it comes to grain and other supplies, because winter times shut down the passes between the the Vale and the Riverlands because it gets so snowy that it's almost impossible to get through. So Gulltown is the only way to get to the Vale. It is also a crucial area because it connects Westeros to the northern free cities. So the Bravos Vale route is pretty popular. So we know that the trade in Gulltown is kind of specialized in the north. But Gulltown doesn't seem to have a specialized focus in trade. It's not like Lannisport where they have the goldsmiths. But it does seem to be an important trade route. So I gave it an 8.5 out of 10 for trade, as it is pretty crucial in the Vale. It is not a major regional powerhouse like other cities. Now, cleanliness is going to be a little bit hard to track because no one talks about how clean it is. So I'm going to have to assume it is about as dirty as the average city. So kind of somewhat dirty. It's going to have probably like horse dung on the street and pee and dirt roads. So I'm going to be generous and give it a 7 out of 10 for cleanliness. Security is an interesting metric because we know that it is a walled city, but we also know that it has been sacked a number of times, but all of those have been when the Andals arrived, so not for thousands of years. The last time that Gulltown was attacked was in Robert's Rebellion when they burned all of the fleets, but they couldn't get inside the walls. Gulltown hasn't been raided in a while. They've never been able to breach the walls in hundreds of years. I'm going to rate it at 8 out of 10 for security. It is not a 9 or 10 because we know that it can be threatened. We know that the ships are able to be burned. We know that you can attack it, but it seems very defensible in a very good region. The political climate of Gulltown is important for local politics, but once you get outside the Vale, you start to see the political way of Gulltown to diminish a lot. They don't have much authority over anyone not in the Vale because the trade is regionally important, okay? Gulltown is heavily impactful when it comes to Vale trade, but not much else. Maybe some of the minor houses in the Riverlands and the Crownlands when it comes to the Bay of Crabs and that little inlet, but After that, they're going to come to King's Landing. They're going to go to the other major cities. Also, House Grafton rules the Gulltown, and we don't know much about them. We don't see them as being that politically important. We also know that they're the Arryns of Gulltown, but the Arryns of the Erie don't like them. They think that they're kind of lesser than because they married a lot of merchants, and they're almost entirely written off. So for that, I'm going to give their political climate a 6 out of 10. Slightly above average, but still not that impactful when it comes to non-Vale related political scenes. The next city is Lannisport, located in the Westerlands. For visuals, you have to analyze the fact that it is a coastal city surrounded by immense mountains, just like in the Vale. But it has Castle Rock near it, which is this huge, massive rock. It is based on the Rock of Gibraltar, which is just, it's beautiful, it's enormous, and I think that's why it gets the edge over Gulltown. So I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 for visuals. Now, the climate of Lannisport seems to be more extreme than Gulltown because it's in the south. So the summers are going to be hotter, although the winters might not be as cold. But I actually prefer weather to be a little bit more mild, maybe a bit colder in the wintertime. So I'm going to give the climate a 7 out of 10. The economy of Lannisport is extremely important for the Westerlands. The Gold Road, Rose Road, and Ocean Road all meet up around Lannisport. The gold trade for the Westerlands all runs through Lannisport as it gets shipped out around the world. The goldsmiths in the city make it a lucrative trading partner for the free cities. So for that, it's going to receive a 9 out of 10 for the economy. Cleanliness is an important metric, but once again, we know almost nothing about the actual cleanliness process of Lannisport, but we do know that it supposedly smells fresh and earthy with a hint of wood smoke. So for that, it's going to get the edge on Gulltown and receive an 8 out of 10 for cleanliness. The security aspect of Lannisport is important because the Iron Islands are very close by and they are prone to attacks from the Ironborn. The city is very defensible with its strong outer walls, but in the histories, it has been burned down 3 times and sacked 3 dozen times. So for that, it's going to receive a lower score than Gulltown, and it's going to get a 7 out of 10. Now, it might seem a little insane because it's got stronger walls, but its location is crucial because it borders the Reach. It's right near the Ironborn, and it just over the histories, it has been attacked. It's been assaulted. While in the Vale, Gulltown sits in an area that is not as attackable. So over the histories, it hasn't been burned down that many times. The last time Gulltown was taken was when the ships were burned down in Robert's Rebellion, and then the ships were burned down in the Targaryen era. But the last time it was actually sacked was in the coming of the Andals. But the last time that Lannisport was raided was only a couple hundred years ago. The political climate of Lannisport is interesting. It is ruled by a cadet branch of the Lannisters, and they seemingly have close ties with the Wardens of the West. But Lannisport never really seems to play a large role in Westerosi politics, although it does seem to be significantly more important than Gulltown because of the gold route that runs through it, and all the roads run near or close to Lannisport, because you have the Ocean Road, Rose Road, and Gold Road all running around it, unlike Gulltown, which has none of the major roads. So Lannisport has the trade aspect, and trade does dictate politics a little bit. The cadet branch also has those very close ties to the Lannisters, so now it's going to receive a score of 8.5 for its political climate because of its close ties to the Lannisters and just the sheer trade that goes through it, and money is very important for politics. White Harbor is the most interesting city because it is the smallest and seemingly the least economically important, but it is the gateway to the north. So first up we have visuals. This might seem biased, but the rocky coasts of White Harbor seem more appealing than the mountainous lands of Gulltown. It seems like it would be pleasant to be around and just nice to look at the beaches of this northern area. So for that, I am going to give the visuals of White Harbor an 8 out of 10. The climate of White Harbor is also interesting because we know that in the summer, the waters around White Harbor can get warm enough to swim in. Septon Chase grew up on the banks of the White Knife, and he said that he learned how to swim and he was a strong swimmer. This implies that there are times in the summer or the winter where the White Knife isn't frozen. We also and is swimmable, more importantly, so it's not cold enough to get frostbite or hypothermia. So this leads me to believe that the waters around White Harbor are warm enough to swim in for most of the summer months, because the weather in A Song of Ice and Fire is typically the same in the summer, so that you could have years and years and years of weather where you can swim and go outside without it being absolutely freezing. So this leads me to believe that the winters of White Harbor are going to be a lot more mild than the other parts of the north, because we know that White Harbor doesn't freeze in the wintertime. So this can imply that the winters don't get like negative 20 degrees like maybe in other parts of the north. We know that Winterfell can get up to like 10 feet of snow, but we've never seen that in White Harbor. So for all those factors, I am going to give the climate of White Harbor a 7.5 out of 10 because of its more mild winters than the rest of the north. The economy of White Harbor is strangely paradoxical in its nature because it is seemingly unimportant. It has the smallest economy in all of Westeros, but it is crucial for the north. It is a key import of grain in wintertime because it is the only way to import grain. We also know that the Manderley lords are some of the richest and wealthiest in the north. They have massive silver mines all around White Harbor, which are great ways to get money because they have a silver mint in the city. So it is vital for the north. It is key for the surrounding area, but it is not an economic hub anywhere else really around Westeros or in Essos. We don't see that much trade go around it. We do know that some Braavosi people go to White Harbor to trade. Some people from Gulltown, some because we know that we saw a ship that went across the far east that sailed from the Three Sisters and was heading to White Harbor. But when we looked at the White Harbor in the Davos chapters, we didn't see that many merchants. We saw a fair amount, but not as much as King's Landing or Gulltown or Lannisport. But because of the crucial aspect of its nature for the North, I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10, purely because it is crucial that White Harbor is successful for the North to be successful. Cleanliness is something I want to talk about because White Harbor is said that the city smells like salt and the sea, and the streets are cobbled and paved. But it also has a fishy scent to it, so if you don't like fish, this might be a turnoff for you, but I actually don't mind a slightly fishy smell because I think like just the outdoorsy salt sea smell would be really good. I've been to northern cities that are pretty cold, and like just the cold salty smell is really good for like your lungs and the sea air. So when we look at all of this in White Harbor, and when Davos is in there, he never comments on the smell. He only talks about how it smells like the sea. He never says it smells nasty or dirty. He doesn't say that he sees feces in the street. The only negative downside is that there were a lot of people that were going in from smaller towns because they were afraid of the war, but that is not a downside for the cleanliness. He never remarks on that. So because of that, I'm going to give White Harbor an 8 out of 10 for cleanliness. Now, the security of White Harbor is going to be something that we can talk about more because we've actually had someone inside White Harbor, unlike in Gulltown or Lannisport. But we know that White Harbor is very well defended. There's the Seal Rock, which is a massive stone outside the outer harbor that is crowned with a ring fort of weathered stones, and the Manderleys have fortified it with crossbowmen, scorpions, and spitfires, and the stone is 50 feet above the water, so it seems very defendable if ships are trying to attack. There's also a mile-long, 30-foot wall with towers every 100 yards that separates the inner harbor and the outer harbor. So if ships are trying to assault the White Harbor, they have to cross this massive wall to get to the inner harbor. Because we know more about the defense of White Harbor, because we know that the Manderleys have fortified it quite well and have done plenty of preventative measures to make sure that White Harbor can't be attacked, and because there's no instances of White Harbor having been sacked or burned down since maybe a couple thousand years ago, I'm going to give White Harbor a 9 out of 10 for security. The The political climate of White Harbor is unique because White Harbor is very regionally important. It is almost obsolete to any other area of Westeros, but in the north, it is so important that the Lords of Winterfell must be on good terms with the Manderleys. Because if White Harbor is not on the same side as the Starks will starve to death in the wintertime. The Manderleys are also one of the strongest houses in the north. There are a dozen petty lords and 100 landed knights sworn to White Harbor. White Harbor is also very economically powerful with the silver mines and the trade running through it, making the Manderleys one of the richest houses in the north. So all of this means that the Starks must have some amicable terms with the Manderleys. They need to be on good relations. So this means that the Manderleys have a good sway over northern politics. But they don't have that much sway over any southern politics. No southern lord is really going to have any fear over the Manderleys. But that's not really what matters here. The north is so isolated from the rest of Westeros that it doesn't really need to hold much sway anywhere else. It's the north that matters. So because of all these factors, I'm going to give White Harbor an 8 out of 10 for political climate. This city is going to be my favorite one to grade because this is the rat-infested, shit-filled city of King's Landing. Now, one of its saving graces is it is beautiful. It has got the Blackwater Rush to its south and the beautiful King's Wood, which and all that surrounding forest and trees and the river and the gullet. I think that I can easily give King's Landing an 8 out of 10 for visuals. But its climate is going to be a downside. It supposedly gets very, very hot in King's Landing. People don't wear clothes, they wear thin silks, they wear cotton sometimes, and it apparently gets so hot that like the clothes start sticking to them, and just I hate humidity, and I hate the just sweltering heat that is described because it's near the sea, so it's probably gets so hot and so humid that you're like walking through soup. So I'm gonna have to give it a 5 out of 10, and honestly, I would give it a 4 out of 10, but we just don't know enough about the climate to give it something that low. The economy of King's Landing is a saving grace. It is something that is massive and ginormous. King's Landing is a major trade hub. It connects Westeros with the southern free cities like Myr, Lys, Tyrosh. You also have Pentos and Bravos and Lorath. It's just massive trade goes between them. King's Landing is the largest of the cities in Westeros. It has the most trade, the most economy. It's humongous. So I think it is well deserving of a 9.5 out of 10. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the cleanliness of King's Landing. It is said that you can smell King's Landing from a mile away. It's said that it smells like a rotten whore. It smells like shit, and terrible musks just permeate your nose. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. The only reason why it does not have a lower score, the only reason why it is not at a 1 out of 10, is because at least there aren't dead bodies in the street. And that's because they're in the bowls of brown. The security of King's Landing is laughable at best. The mere act of shutting down the Rosa Road was enough to almost starve out the city. Stannis was almost able to take the city when most of his fleet was gone from a nuclear bomb. I just don't see how a city of this size, of this proportion, is so laughably bad at defending itself. At its height, the guards were 6,000, which is insanely small for a city of 500,000 people. For reference, at its peak, the city of Rome had 1 million inhabitants and about 15,000 people, so it had a guard ratio of about 1 to 63. King's Landing has a guard ratio of about 1 to 83, and that was with the gold cloaks being as big as possible. They were hiring random people, and they could still only get 6,000 guards. King's Landing is like a figurehead. It is not there to be defensible. It is there to be its capital. But it relies on the fact that the surrounding kingdoms will give them an army to prevent a siege, to prevent an attack. But anytime an actual army goes to attack King's Landing, it kind of immediately folds. So for that, I'm going to give the security of King's Landing a 4 out of 10. But the political climate of King's Landing is perfect. It is where the king resides. It is where all the important players of the game are. Anyone that is anyone has someone in King's Landing to help them out, has someone to tell them what's going on, what the king's doing, what policies is he enacting. That's where the lords reside, the important ones. The hand of the king is there. So for that, I'm going to give the political climate of King's Landing a 10 out of 10. Oldtown is the oldest of all the cities, and for the longest of times, it was the most populated and the most economically important. The city of Oldtown is located on the Bay of the Whispering Sound on the Honeywine River. It has rolling hills to the east and the Shield Isles to the west. It is flowery and beautiful and pretty, and there are birds everywhere. With all of this peaceful air and the nature and the goodness, I think an 8 out of 10 fairly represents Oldtown. It might not have the most unique of scenery and location, but it has consistent, tried and true, beautiful nature. The climate of Oldtown is saddening, because due to one throwaway line from Grandmaster Pycelle in the first book, makes it to where I have to rank the climate very low. Because what we know about Oldtown is during the hot summers, it swelters with heat and only comes alive at nighttime. Does that sound like a place you want to live? Granted, it was a hot summer. It was one of the hottest summers out there, but still, because we know that it gets terribly hot there, I'm going to have to rank it low. I'm going to have to give it a 5.1. I wanted to give it something lower. I wanted to give it a 4 out of 10 and say that the summers would just be too unbearably hot for me. But I went against it because that was one of the hottest summers ever. So, assumedly, other summer times get really hot, but it doesn't get unbearable. This grade is going to be slightly more controversial than the others, but for the economy, there are some crucial elements we need to look at. Although it is the second most important port, it is the richest city, and it is home to the only bank in Westeros. And the trade of Oldtown is insanely crucial. It is a grain export capital of the world. The free cities love trading in Oldtown. There are so many professions that are in Oldtown, so many jobs in here, and there are so many unique things only in Oldtown. You have the Maesters of the Citadel, they buy books, so if you're a scholar and like a learner of the arts, you could go sell your books at Oldtown. You could learn these arcane things, so for that, I'm going to give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Now, let's move on to my most favorite one, the cleanliness. Because Oldtown is the only city in Westeros to have all of its roads paved. I know that I said that White Harbor had cobbled roads, but that was not all of them. We don't know that all of them. We know that there is a couple roads that are cobbled, but we know that in Oldtown, every single road is paved. The only downside is that when it rains, it gets pretty slippery, but I'd rather have slippery paved roads than dirt, mud-filled roads that you get your shoes all muddy and dirty and wet on. We also know that Oldtown smells flowery. It smells like perfume and just scents of fruits and just something that you would actually want to smell instead of the feces-infested King's Landing. So I'm going to give it the high score of a 9.5 out of 10. The security of Oldtown is strangely low. We know that it is the security of Oldtown is very interesting because a lot of the measures that they take to protect the city don't come from the actual walls itself. We do know that in the past, when Oldtown wasn't as populous, it wasn't as defensible, it got raided a number of times from the Ironborn. The people from Dorne and the Westerlands have sacked it, burned it, torn it down brick by brick. But the high towers, they've constructed walls that are massive. They've defended it. They took the battle isles and they've installed their knights and lords to where the Ironborn have to go through there to kind of get to Oldtown. Oldtown is very defensible. They have the high tower, which is a good spotting point to see where enemy armies are and attacks. And we know that it has been sacked less than Lannisport, but it's still been sacked a fair number of times. So I'm going to give it a 7.5, purely because of its location in the Westerlands, Dorne, and the Ironborn are all near it. So there's so many different enemies that they have that would love to sack it if there was like an all-out war that happened. The political climate of Oldtown is very unique because it is pretty much the only city where the ruling lords are more powerful than their liege lords. The High Towers, for most of history, were more important than the Tyrells because they had Oldtown and for most of history, Oldtown was the dominating city. Before King's Landing, Oldtown was the city to go to for trade. It was better than Gulltown, better than Lannisport. It was better than White Harbor. It was better than all of them. It was dominating in everything. Another important distinction is that the High Towers were kings, just like the Graftons of Gulltown. They ruled their own area, but then the Tyrells they vassalized them. But the High Towers still had this massive presence when it came to politics. I guess the height of the High Tower political rule was in the reign of Viserys when he took a High Tower to wife. Otto Hightower was the hand of the king. The High Towers were very politically important, but now the High Towers are still important. They control Oldtown. They have just a massive political influence over everything. And don't forget, the Starry Sept and the Citadel are located in Oldtown. The Starry Sept is the second most important sept besides the Sept of Baelor in King's Landing. And then the Citadel is the place where all the maesters go to train. And I know that the maesters aren't supposed to take part in the world of politics, but the Citadel is a it's a trade network of information. It is an information hub where everything in Westeros gets sent there and compiled there. So the High Towers and just Oldtown in general has a plethora of information and knowledge. So for that, I'm going to give the political climate of Oldtown a 10 out of 10. So Oldtown just dominates in almost every single category. So that is my grading of every single city in Westeros. Now let's tally up the results and see who won. So as I said, I am adding up every single one of the metrics, so all 6 of them, and then I'll just do the simple averaging. So I divide by 6, and then that gets our rating out of 10. In last place, unsurprisingly, is the city of King's Landing with a score of 6.41. In 4th place is Gulltown with a score of 7.6, a pretty big jump, almost a 1.2 point increase from 5th place to 4th place. In 3rd place is Lannisport with a score of 8.08. Once again, a pretty big jump, but not as large. It's about a 0.42 point increase. And then in these last two, it's a really close race. But our number 2 spot is going to go to White Harbor with a score of 8.16. And with a score of 8.18, we have the city of Oldtown for 1st place. Unsurprisingly, because it is the oldest city, it's the cleanest city, it has the only bank in Westeros, it has the Citadel, the Starry Sept, the High Towers are very politically important. That is going to conclude my grading of every single city in Westeros. If you have any disagreements, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. This video is going to be releasing on Thanksgiving Day, so I hope everyone has an amazing Thanksgiving, and I hope you come back and watch my next video or watch some of my previous videos up above.